programs here at the National Head Start Association. If you joined us last week in our first webinar, The Future of Early Learning is Relational, welcome back. If you missed it, the recording is available on our website. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I am very excited you are here to learn about our topic today, Neuro-Nurturing, It Makes a Difference with Deborah McNelis. Please share in the chat your name and where you are zooming in from. Before I introduce our guest today, I want to remind you that these Early Head Start webinars are part of our Early Head Start Rising campaign. If you would like to know more about the Early Head Start campaign, please visit our website. You will have the link in the chat. Please check it out. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Deborah McNelis. I'd like to share that the first time I spoke with Deborah, we couldn't stop talking about some of the things we're very passionate about, children's and brain development. She is an author, speaker, and creator of Neuro-Nurturing. She's an early brain specialist. She has done several presentations and keynotes for communities, schools, and organizations, as well as heard on radios, interviews, and webinars worldwide. She's also a mom of 2 grown daughters and 5 grandchildren. And many years ago, she was involved directly with Head Start at a local level and at the national level evaluation as an Even Start Family Literacy Coordinator for 12 years. Before passing it on to Deborah, I want to remind you, all of you to mute yourself so we can hear the presenter. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will have some time to answer some questions at the end of the presentation. Deborah, welcome to the Early Head Start Summer Series. We are happy to have you.
Well, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here as well. I appreciate being invited so that I can share what I'm very passionate about. So thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the introduction or for the invitation. And hello to everyone. I am thrilled that you are here, and I want to share a lot of information, as I said, the information that I'm passionate about, and combine it with my admiration for the work that you do, because Head Start, Head Start, even before early brain development information came out, was doing all that children need. And that's what this presentation is all about. What do children need? And recognizing that that's what's happening in the Head Start and early Head Start world. So let me get into it here. All right, so neuro-nurturing, creating great connections for children, and that's what you are doing every day. And that's what, I want to recognize because I so admire and value the difference that you are making. I'm going to make a couple additional comments to introduce myself. I've been in the field of early childhood education for about 40 years. And this is kind of just a little bit of a collage about me. And I started with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education because I just wanted every adult to understand and support the potential within every child. And to do that, adults need to have some understanding, right? Need to understand what is going to make the positive difference in helping children reach their full potential. So that was my initial role in teaching. So I was making that difference directly with children. And then I started branching out and helping parents understand how to be more involved with their children's education. And then it was later, as was mentioned, I coordinated a family literacy program for about 12 years, and I was connected with Head Start. It was a collaborative effort, and I did some evaluation with Head Start and Even Start family literacy programming. And it was during that time that the brain research information started coming out. And I got so excited. I thought, everyone needs to know this. So I had then had the wonderful opportunity to work for an advocacy agency. And I worked with, and I'm going to talk more about him as we get into this, and Isabel mentioned him in her presentation last week. Dr. Bruce Perry was a collaborator with the advocacy agency I was working with to create presentations, to create awareness and understanding of how children's brains develop. And I did that for about 4 years. And then from there, the funding for the Brain Project ran out. It was a nonprofit, and that happens, right? So that's when I decided, this is too important. I can't not do this. I have to do this. So I started my own company called Brain Insights, giving insights into the way that children's brains develop in very practical, simple, understandable ways that can be, as I said, understood easily, but also implemented into everyday life with children. So that's kind of the overview. And what I tell everyone is my goal is only to reach everyone. We need everyone to understand this, don't we? Not only people that are working directly with children or interacting with children every day, but we need anyone that has an influence on the way that children are going to, the experiences that children are going to have. So everyone that is involved with policies and programs and funding and voting and everything needs to have this understanding. So that's why I'm so enthused about sharing all of this with you today. So thanks for being here. So this is just a quick overview of how I will break this down. So I'm going to give some brain insights basics, and then some neural nurturing insights, and I'm going to explain what neural nurturing means to me and why I created that term. And then we'll do a wrap up and a Q&A session. So you will have a chance to ask questions toward the end of the session. So let's get into it. So let's begin with recognizing that your brain is important in this process. We're talking about the development of young children's brains, but to do that, your brain is significant. And I will make that point even more emphasized as we get into this even further. So what children need most is adults that understand development. If adults understand, as I said, if we have all adults understanding, we're going to provide the most optimal experiences for children. So, brain development. Sometimes hearing that term, brain development, ooh, that sounds like it's going to be real sciencey. That sounds like it's going to be, high levels of neuroscience research. And the other thing that sometimes happens with hearing this term is people start thinking, well, if brains develop so much in the early years, if there's a rapid development in these early years, well, then we must push as much knowledge and intelligence building into those brains as early as possible. People often think brain development is only related to children being smart or intelligent. So that's why, those are the reasons why I decided we need a new term to be talking about this. So I decided to create the term neuro-nurturing. So what I feel this term does is it conveys that it's not just about intelligence building, it's about nurturing that whole child. It's neuro, it's the neurodevelopment, the brain, the neurons in the brain, but it's affecting all of who a child is. So sometimes that isn't thought of, as I said, when you think of the term brain development. So, and the term nurturing, right? That's what children need. Children need nurturing. That's the key to helping a child reach their fullest potential and letting them be all that they are. That's my goal. Let's help children be all that they are and all that they and thriving in being themselves. So what I realized when I came up with that term, what I realized is at the beginning of most of my presentations, I was saying that brain development, can be really complicated. We can talk about high levels of neuroscience terminology, but to provide what a child needs, I was saying it really isn't all that complicated to provide the experiences that they need. And I was saying that there's 4 basic things: providing for the physical needs, the safety, security needs, providing nurturing, and providing play. I realized I was saying those 4 components. So when I was trying to think of, well, how do I convey what neural nurturing is? Well, it's all of those 4 components. So when we go through this today, you can think about, oh, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. You are doing what and providing what young children need. So we're going to go into more detail, of course, the basics of the detail anyway, as we go into this further. So we're going to begin with a simple understanding of brain development basics. So in 1996, as I said, when I was coordinating that family literacy program, the brain development information started coming out. They often, the 90s is referred to as the decade of the brain, because the technology was more advanced than it had ever been before. So we were able to see more of what was going on in young children's brains. When I was working on my bachelor's degree, it was all based on theory and behavioral studies, because we didn't have the technology to see more about what was happening in young brains. So Newsweek magazine had a special issue put out during the 90s in February 1996 to help people realize how important these early years are and share some of this brain development information. So they had this quote in the magazine stating, "Early childhood experiences exert a dramatic and precise impact, physically determining how the intricate neural circuits of the brain are wired." Right? They put that out there so that people would have a better understanding that it's the early childhood experiences that are having this impact. But they worded it in this way. And that's what I was referring to earlier, that we can or the way I share the information is in more understandable terminology. So basically what this is saying is early childhood experiences physically grows and develops a brain. So I'm going to do a simulation in a bit to clarify that even further. So the first part of this statement, you already know. This is why you do what you do. This is why you're interested in being in a webinar on this topic, that regardless of the general environment, all children need stimulation and nurturance for healthy development. You know that, right? Again, that's why you're here. That's why you do what you do. If these are lacking, or if a child's caretakers are indifferent or hostile, the child's brain development may be impaired. Because the brain adapts to its environment. So because it adapts to its environment, it will adapt to a negative environment just as readily as it will adapt to a positive environment. So the brain is designed to adapt to whatever experiences are happening primarily and repeatedly in their life. So when we stop to think about that, it's kind of cool, because certainly prenatally, a lot of development is occurring, right? And that's why early Head Start is so important, because the prenatal development is having an impact. But many people, and you're probably aware of this, that 90% of the brain develops in the preschool years. So it's like the preschool years from birth to kindergarten are like another trimester in development, which provides us with this opportunity to have the optimal experiences to develop that brain as healthy as possible. But when you think about that, the brain is designed to develop primarily after birth, that most of this development is happening after birth, it's designed so that it can adapt to whatever environment it is exposed to. So if you think about a baby born in, well, let's take Start headquarters location. If a baby is born in Northern Virginia, they're going to adapt their brain to, first of all, survive, and secondly, succeed. The brain's first goal is to survive, and secondly, to succeed. So it will adapt to the experiences so that it can survive and succeed in Northern Virginia. A baby born in China is going to adapt their brain to the experiences and the environment and the culture to succeed and survive and succeed in China. So when you think about that, a brain is designed to do that, it's really cool. So it will adapt to whatever is happening most repeatedly, and we'll get into more detail about that repetition as we go into this further. So I said I'm not going to talk about high levels of neuroscience, but what I am going to do is just talk about 4 major brain areas, and it really is helpful to have this understanding. So what happens is when we're born, the only part of our brain that is fully finished developing is called the brainstem. It's at the base of our brain and the top of our spinal cord. And remember how I said the brain is focused primarily initially on, well, primarily overall on survival. The brainstem is the area that regulates our heart rate, our breathing, our body temperature, our blood pressure. All of those keep us alive functions, right? So in a full-term baby, the brainstem is the only part of the brain that is fully finished developing. So when you think of a preterm baby and the kinds of things that we have to monitor or provide for them, it's those things, right? Help them breathe, help keep them warm, right? Monitor all of those survival aspects because their brainstem isn't fully finished developing yet. So the next part of the brain to complete development is called the midbrain. And you can see it's pointing to 2 different areas. One is in the middle of the brain, right? Not high level terminology, right? And then the other one is next to the brainstem, and that is called the cerebellum. And that is the area that regulates, is really responsible for our balance and part of our motor skills. So the midbrain is responsible for motor skills and for sleep patterns. So as this part of the brain develops further, those sleep patterns begin to get more regular. That newborn sleep is kind of all over the place, right? We don't know when that baby's going to sleep. But then as that part of the brain develops, now we can better predict this is when the morning nap will be. This is when bedtime will be. So you know all these ages and stages of development, but having understanding that this is how the brain is developing, then that's contributing to those ages and stages helps clarify, doesn't it? So as I said, that's also the area that regulates our motor skills. So when that cerebellum isn't fully developed, that's why babies tip over when you try to sit them up. They don't have that balance area of their brain developed well enough yet. They haven't had enough experience to develop that portion of the brain. And then, so as this part of the brain develops further, that balance is happening, that baby's able to bat out a rattle and do that eye-hand coordination, that baby is able to roll over and sit up and crawl and walk as this part of the brain develops further. So the next part of the brain to complete development is called the limbic system. And this is considered the emotional area of the brain, and it's one of the main memory areas. There's many memory areas of the brain, but this is that main memory area that we would talk about in relation to Alzheimer's or dementia issues. So memory and emotion are really, really closely connected. So when a child is feeling nurtured and safe and secure and trusting and having that positive feeling of a nurturing relationship, they're going to remember what they're learning better. It's going to correlate with those positive emotions and that learning and that memory. And then the last part of the brain to complete development is up at the top of our brain, and that's called the cortex. And that's what we would consider the thinking area of the brain. So I want to make a point here that this is the order that the brain completes development, in this order. However, all of these areas are developing all along the way. It's just the order that they complete development. I hope that makes sense with that clarification. So I want to share with you then the very last part of the brain that completes development is a portion of that cortex, but it's called the prefrontal cortex, and it's right behind our forehead. And this part of the brain, when it is fully finished developing, it becomes like in charge of the rest of the brain. It becomes the CEO. So if you know the term executive function, the executive of the brain, it becomes in charge. So when that part of the brain is fully finished developing, it allows us to prioritize our thoughts, gives us the ability to imagine, to think in the abstract, to anticipate consequences, to plan, to control impulses, and to regulate behaviors. Are those some skills you would like the children in your life to have? Right? They are, definitely. But this is the very last part of the brain to develop. So having this understanding really helps provide us with some realistic expectations and support in the development of a healthy brain. So let's just think of, I was making the point about the brain is developing all along the way. So let's look at or think about an 18-month-old. If you have an 18-month-old in a room, that 18-month-old is going to get into what? Everything, right? Yeah, that's what an 18-month-old should be doing. They need to explore their world and check it out. And what does this do? What can I make this do? And experiment and trial and error, right? So that's what they're designed to do. Or that's the stage that they're in, that they're meant to do. So, but there's not much planning to it, right? It's just, this looks interesting. I'm going to check this out right now, right? I just happened upon it. So let's see what happens now. Now, if there was a 4-year-old in the room and a 4-year-old was playing with something, and then they see a book across the room, they can think, when I'm finished playing with this, I'm going to go look at that book. So that 4-year-old can begin to do some planning, right? But he's probably not going to plan what he's going to do on 4th of July, right? So the planning is beginning to occur. So now let's think about and see if you think this sounds like fun. You have a 2-year-old in a grocery cart in the checkout line. What do you think of that? Sound like fun? Have you been there? And that 2-year-old wants, what's that eye level? The candy? And you say, oh, no, we're not getting candy. Well, is her prefrontal cortex fully developed yet at 2 years old? No. You know what age that prefrontal cortex completes development? At about the age of 25, mid-20s. And some research is showing it might even be a little bit later. So her prefrontal cortex is not fully developed enough for her to control her impulses right now. She is having these big emotions. And remember that limbic area? That's the emotional area of the brain. She's having these big emotions. I want that candy. And so that limbic area is all lit up. And that prefrontal cortex isn't mature enough to help control those big emotions she's feeling right now. So remember how I said your brain is so important in the development of a child? Well, this is where the mature brain of the adult comes in. So your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. So what you need to do is get out of your limbic area, because you might be feeling a lot of emotions too, right? You might be agitated that she's screaming in the store and people are looking at you and you're wondering, how do I control her, and how do I get how do I get her to calm down, and all of those kinds of thoughts. Well, you need to go to your prefrontal cortex, take a deep breath, regulate yourself. There's a nerve called the vagal nerve, and it calms you down when you take a deep breath. It tells your brain, you're okay, you're fine, nothing dangerous is happening right now. So you can be calm, and you can be that calm person to regulate her. She is so dysregulated because her brain cannot regulate itself yet. So you regulating yourself helps to co-regulate her. And when you do that, you can empathize, you can show her that you care, you can nurture her through those big emotions she's having. I know, it's so hard to not get what you want when you want it, isn't it? It might make you sad. Are you sad? Are you upset? Are you mad? Yeah, I understand. You're upset about that. And helping to calm her through and empathizing with those emotions that she's having in your calmness. And so that co-regulating actually is, that experience of co-regulating is actually contributing to the development of her prefrontal cortex. You've provided that experience for her. Now she's experienced it. And if that happens repeatedly, it's contributing to her healthy development of her prefrontal cortex. And you know what doesn't help? Is handing her a phone instead. Because that's going to calm her down and distract her, but it doesn't give her that experience of co-regulating to contribute to her optimal brain development. So here you can see a slide, a hugely magnified slides of the brain making connections. So at birth, there's only a few connections in the brain, relatively few connections in the brain. And after 3 months, you can see there's more connections in the brain. And after 15 months, even more. And after 2 years of experiences, that brain is full of connections. So that's what the Newsweek magazine quote was referring to, that it's those early childhood experiences that are creating these connections in the brain and physically growing the brain. And so I want to do a quick little simulation with you. This is my, this is kind of my signature thing. People think of me as the styrofoam balls and pipe cleaners lady. So let's pretend that these are 2 of the 86 billion brain cells that we're born with. All right, so here's 2 of them. A child has the experience of having a story read to them. It's an experience they are having, so it's making connections between those brain cells. I lost one of my brain cells. Here we go. So it's those early childhood experiences that are growing and connecting the brain. So she has that experience, that story being read to her. She's experiencing touch, she's having visual stimulation, she's having auditory stimulation. All of those experiences are happening. So now you're singing a song with her and it makes a connection in her brain. So each time she's having these experiences, her brain is making new connections, and the brain is physically growing and developing. And what you can see here is that the brain the brain cells can make more than one connection. So the number of connections that can be made is limitless. So all of those experiences are physically growing and developing the brain. That's what you're doing every day. That's what you are creating. This is what I like to tell everyone that works with children. If we could change the title, I would love that. If we could change the title of your profession, you are brain developers. That's what you really are. In fact, I made t-shirts that say, I am a brain developer, positively influencing the world. So what that does is it creates these pathways in the brain. So these are considered pathways. So it's just like on the ground. If you go over the ground over and over and over again, a deep path is worn. So if that child is having that story read to them and they're having that experience of hearing the words and the having that touch and that nurturing experience and that visual stimulation, if that's repeated, that's why it's so important to read to children repeatedly. Deep pathways are worn. Now, if a child only has, very rarely has a book read to them, a deep path isn't going to be worn for all those experiences. So whatever is happening frequently in that child's life, the brain is going to adapt to whatever is happening repeatedly, and these pathways are created. Now, what if we went over the fence and went through the grass the other direction? The first time we went that way, not much would happen, right? But if we started going that direction over and over and over again, a new pathway would be created. So repetition of experiences and creating new experiences are both important. So what if we don't want this old pathway that's been worn? So say a child has adapted to experiences that have been repeated in their life, and we really want to change that pathway or eliminate that pathway from that experience that has happened repeatedly in their life. If we start creating new pathways, going a new direction, creating new experiences, that's going to be positive, right? But does that mean that the old pathway is going to go away immediately? No, right? It doesn't go away immediately, just like on the ground. So it depends on how deeply that path is worn, right? So this is the reason why the expression it's hard to teach a new dog new tricks. It's better to teach that puppy in the first place than to teach a dog new tricks, right? That's why early intervention is so important. The early years are the time that the brain has the most plasticity, meaning the time that it's most rapidly changing and developing and making changing those connections. The good news is, you might be thinking, can it change later? Well, yes, and that's the good news. It's always changing throughout our lives. If you're learning something new here today, your brain is changing. So we're all throughout our lives, it is changing. The thing is, after those early months and years, it doesn't change as rapidly. So in these early months, the brain is making these connections at a rate of 1 million per second. How about that? 1 million per second. Yeah, they used to say 800 a second, and I thought that was a lot. It's now 1 million a second. So that's why we want to do as much as we can in these early years, because it's just going to take a lot more time and patience and consistency to change, and a lot of times money, to change things later. So let's just do as much as we can to develop those brains as healthy as possible in the first place. That's what Head Start is all about, right? So wow, repeating experiences really makes a difference to my brain. Repetition creates strong pathways. This is a simple representation of what I've been talking about. So over here on the left, this is a representation of a healthy brain making connections based on positive and optimal experiences and nurturing interactions. The one in the middle is the representation of a brain that has had a lack of stimulating experiences. So it just didn't have enough experiences to create those connections in the brain. It was lacking. And then the one on the upper right is a brain developing with many experiences, but those are what we would consider adverse experiences. Those are, the brain is still going to make connections. As I said, the brain adapts to whatever environment. So it's going to still make connections based on those adverse experiences. So it's still going to have just as many experience or connections, but they're not the healthy, optimal experiences we want for children. So I mentioned at the beginning that the agency that I worked with collaborated with Dr. Bruce Perry, and hopefully most of you know about Dr. Bruce Perry. He's awesome, focusing on trauma, stress, abuse, and neglect, but his emphasis is on relationships. And that's what Isabel talked about in her presentation last week. The key is relationships. And so Dr. Bruce Perry developed this neurosequential model. And it shows those 4 brain areas that we talked about, that the brainstem, midbrain, limbic, and cortex. And this is the proportions, the ratios that a healthy brain should develop. So that the brainstem would have the least number of connections, the midbrain would have the next largest amount of connections, the limbic area the next largest, and the cortex should end up with the most brain connections in healthy development. So you can see it correlated there. So brainstem to safety, midbrain to movement, the limbic to emotional engagement, and the cortex to learning. Now, if a child has had developmental trauma or those adverse kind of experiences that I briefly mentioned with that other example, you can see if a child has had this developmental trauma and didn't have the buffering of nurturing relationships as they went through these adverse experiences, then what happens is that survival area of the brain develops larger out of proportion. So those two lower areas of the brain, the brainstem and the midbrain, that's where our stress response systems are activated. So if we're feeling threatened, we're going to our blood pressure is going to rise, our heart rate's going to increase, and our motor skills are going to kick in so we can fight or flee the situation, right? So when we're feeling threatened, those areas of the brain get activated. And if that's what's happening repeatedly in that child's life over and over again, that's the area of the brain that's going to have the most connections in it. So survival gets developed out of proportion. And that regulation area gets developed out of proportion, and the social emotional abilities and skills develop smaller out of proportion out of lack of those experiences, and the thinking part of the brain develops smaller out of lack of experiences. So this is a child, if you personalize this diagram, if you personalize it and think of a child that has a brain developed in this way, those are children that are going to, just fly off the handle at a small, what you perceive to be a small event. They're going to be triggered and dysregulated more easily because they haven't had those co-regulating experiences to buffer the experiences those adverse experiences they've had in their life. So you may know of or work with children that this is how their brain is developed. So Dr. Bruce Perry also talks about then the 3 R's in reaching the learning brain. And those 3 R's are to, first of all, regulate, like I talked about with the 2-year-old example, and then relate to them. Help regulate, co-regulate with them, get them regulated, then relate to them. Then you can reason with them. So if you correlate this to the diagram of the brain, the neurosequential model, it makes sense, because you can't reason with, go to the thinking part of the brain when that child is dysregulated, right? You can't be, why were you doing that? You don't need to be doing that. You should be doing something different. Well, that child isn't in their thinking part of the brain right now. They're down in that stress response area. So we need to calm that first, and then we can get there through nurturing, and then get to the point where we're helping them learn through how to do behavior differently. Oh, again, repetitive experiences change a child. We get to determine what those repetitive experiences are that we're providing for the children in our care. So I want to quickly then go into a little bit of more detail about neuro-nurturing insights. So again, I told you about those 4 basic areas. Well, what I did from there is broke it down into 5 aspects of each of those areas. And so it's called the neuro-nurturing model. So under physical, providing the physical needs for a child, we need to provide nutrition, hydration, movement, touch, and sleep. All of those contribute enormously to high, well-functioning brains. And in my full presentations, I know we don't have a long period of time today, so I'm going to quickly go through some of these, but not in a lot of detail. As far as security, the 5 aspects of providing security for a child is attunement, consistency, routine, choice, and safety. Under nurturing is responsiveness, presence, empathy, respect, recognition. And under play is laughter, exploration, challenge, music, creativity, and imagination. There is going to be shared with you a link to a free PDF that covers all of these 4 areas and includes this model. So if you're wondering or trying to write down notes quickly, you will be able to download that and access all of that information. So let's look at each of these. As I said, we'll do it briefly, but if you have questions about any of them, we'll have enough time that you can ask more specifics about them. So under physical needs, sleep is essential. Sleep keeps the brain systems in balance. So having adequate amounts of sleep really, really helps the brain function well. Nutrition. Often nutrition is thought about more so in relation to the body than it is thought about the brain, but it really, really, really makes a difference to how the brain functions. And one of the areas of emphasis that I stress is how having adequate amounts of protein, especially for breakfast, really helps the brain function well, helps the child focus, helps the child not be so agitated. And like I said, there's more detail to go into, and if you have questions about that, I can answer those at the end. Nature. Time in nature is essential. It's just like a stress relief button when we go out into nature. I do a whole presentation on the way in which the brain focuses attention and how we can use that to our benefit for behavior and children's self-perception. And when we're in nature, our brain doesn't have to focus attention so strongly and get overstimulated. It calms the brain. Even 10 minutes in nature can make a difference. And so I often share too that if you can't get out in nature, the second best thing is to allow children to look out of a window. And the third best thing is to have nature photographs for children in your classroom that they can look at. So hospitals use this research and provide, every hospital I've ever been in since I learned this has nature photographs or paintings throughout the hospital. There's all kinds of research that supports that, all those benefits. Hydration, the brain is like 75% water. We need to keep it hydrated. So when we're feeling even when we're beginning to feel thirst, that means we're 1 to 2% dehydrated already. So making sure children are having adequate amounts of hydration. Movement, huge. The brain, the body teaches the brain how to think. So this is what my friend Jill Connell, who wrote the book, A Moving Child is a Learning Child. It's a fabulous book that I highly recommend. Movement, there's just so much to say about movement, but we need to allow a lot of movement, not just sit still and be quiet. That's not the optimal way that the brain learns. And then touch, even babies, if there's an absence of touch, that contributes to failure to thrive. We benefit from touch. And I know through COVID, that's been a challenge, right? But touch is critically important. So all of those physical needs. The need for nurturing. This is number one in so many ways. We need to be responsive to children. That's one of the big ones. Being responsive, consistently responsive to those expressed needs of a child, and especially with infants. Dr. Bruce Perry has done research to share that those first 2 months of responsiveness to their expressed needs is critically important. And again, Isabel talked more about that research, and I've just developed something in relation to that called the first 60 days. So that presence, being present for children, having respecting who they are and listening to them and valuing them. We all want acceptance, right? Empathy, I talked a little bit about empathy when I was talking about the 2-year-old in the grocery cart. Empathy is so important. I use this example even with adults. If you are upset about something and I just say, oh, you're okay. Do you feel good about that? Probably not, right? And oftentimes well-intended adults are trying to help a child stop crying and they say, oh, you're okay. But if you empathize instead, I know, that hurt, didn't it? Or you felt bad when your friend took your toy, didn't you? That feels better. Just like as an adult, if you came to me and you were upset about something and I said, wow, I can tell you're really upset about that. You're going to feel better. You're going to be heard, feel like you've been heard and recognized and respected. And so recognition of who a child is, recognition of what they want to share with you. And, kids are always, look at what I did. They want that recognition, right? All right, and play is essential. It's how the brain learns. It's naturally how children learn. We just need to provide those opportunities for children to be creative, to use their imagination, incorporate music, explore, experiment, trial and error. Laughter is so good for the brain. It releases stress. And it builds relationships too. And providing opportunities for children to challenge themselves is also something that happens through play and so hugely beneficial. And I know I'm going quickly over all this, but I want to get enough time for questions. So we're going to do the wrap up and time for questions. So she's feeling so good because it feels so good when you provide what my brain needs most. So what I want you to do is think about what that I shared. What do you already do that makes a difference? Think about that, because what we need to do for ourselves is think about, yep, I'm doing that. Give yourself the acknowledgement that you are doing a million wonderful things for kids every day through the experiences that you're providing. So stop and allow yourself to think about that. So think about all those positives that are contributing to the way in which those connections are being made. And then think about what new things will you do to make a difference. Maybe there's something that triggered as I was sharing, like, you know what, I need to do more of that. Maybe you do it already, but you'd like to do it a little bit more. Or maybe that's triggered something like, oh, you know what, maybe I need to get some nature photos in my classroom. It could be as simple as that. So think about what new things you might do. And then think about, who will you tell? Who will you share the insights with? As I said at the beginning, we need everyone to have this understanding, don't we? We need everyone to understand that we have this opportunity to contribute to what is creating those pathways in children's brains. And if we do it as early as possible, that's the biggest benefit of all. So let's do all we can. So share with everyone. Share with everyone. I keep saying, if you tell 5 people and you ask them to tell 5 people, you know, the 6 degrees of separation theory, wow, then everyone will know. And that's what we need, because we need the world to understand what the children want. This is the note from the children. To adults, we just want to be understood, want to feel safe, want to play, and want to be loved. That's all. So thank you for all you are doing, because you are making a difference. When you think of all those things you do, you are making a difference. And here's that t-shirt I mentioned, because you are a brain developer, positively influencing the world. So this is my last slide to just invite you to connect. I love connecting with people who care about kids. So feel free to, I encourage you, invite you to connect. You can go to my website, you can connect with me on these social media locations. And these are also resources that I've put together. So in addition to doing presentations to create understanding, I also create resources to support the work that you're doing. So I've created these neuro-nurturing interaction packets. There's a whole series of different ages from birth through 5, and a nature packet, and they provide suggestions for interactions on the front of each card. And then the back provides the brain insight as to how it's helping to support child's brain development. So they're good for educators, they're good for sharing with parents. And there's posters for your classroom, and this new guide for the first 60 days. And and I can make these customizable for your organization. So your logo, your contact information can be printed on the back, or we can even brand them to your organization or your company. So I want to support you in the difference that you're making. So thank you so much. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Deborah, for sharing all this great information with us about brain development and the importance of nurturing children's brains through positive experiences and interactions. We open the floor for some questions, or if you have any comments, please unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Ruth Gonzalez from Fort Buchanan, Puerto Rico. I have a question about your material in Spanish. I think I saw one, but I was wondering if the first 60 days or the guide were in Spanish.
Sadly, those are brand new. Thank you for your question. Yeah, the Neuro-Nurturing interaction packets are in Spanish, but the first 60 days guide is so brand new, it hasn't been translated yet. If you'd like to contact me and we could work on having that occur, we could discuss it. So again, thank you for your question on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we have one in the chat. What resources do you have to help someone learn about their own brain as an adult?
I don't know that I have anything specific to adults. However, most of this does apply to adult brains. So when I was talking about the physical needs, security need, you know, all of those things, we need all of that as well. So that is part of, you know, it's been wonderful to see that there's been a lot more emphasis on self-care in recent months. And I don't know if that's come out as a result of COVID or what, but I've seen that more common. And so doing all of those things, nurturing yourself in all of those ways, getting support from others, just recognizing the way that the brain develops and where you're functioning. And then, like I said, hydration, nutrition, time in nature, all of those things, physical activity, movement, those are all critically important to the brain as well. My presentation on attention kind of does a little bit of focus on the adult brain as well, because a lot of that emphasis is on self-perception, and it's so easy for us to get down on ourselves. And that's why I stressed, think about all the positive things you do throughout the day, because, you know, at the end of the day, it will say, oh, I didn't do that well. I didn't do that well. I should have done that differently. I should have handled it better, or whatever. If we turn things around and focus on the positives about ourselves, it really makes a difference. So a lot of what my point is a lot of what I share does apply to adult brains. I don't have really anything that emphasizes further understanding in detail. But I would highly recommend Dr. Bruce Perry's new book that he co-authored with Oprah. If you aren't aware of it, it's called What Happened to You? It's a remarkable book. So I would recommend that one.
All right.
I really appreciated, I'm sorry, I really appreciated you stating the importance of being interactive with the children now at this age early, from at least 0 to 3, and not waiting till they're adults, because it's so hard. Like you said, teaching a dog old tricks, that's so old, but that's so true. That's very well put, very well put.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that comment. Yeah, it's why I do what I do. And that's why I don't focus on the adult brains as much. I focus on, let's do as much as we can for the prevention. Let's develop these brains as healthy as possible in the first place. And so that interaction and understanding that these are the areas of emphasis with that safety, nurturing, play, and what's the one I'm missing? Security. Yeah, it's what they need. And we don't need to be focusing on the academics in these early years. We need to be creating this foundation of this healthy brain first, and then later get into, and if we emphasize that respect and responsiveness to the child, it's going to buffer those adverse experiences, and it's going to create, you know, it's often said, and that's one of the myths that I have in the first 60 days guide, is that it's often said that children are resilient. And that's partly true. Yes, they're resilient because their brain is adapting and changing so rapidly. But but these adverse experiences really impact them if they don't have that nurturing relationship and that responsive, present caregiver to nurture them through those big experiences. So thank you, Ruth, for that comment, because it's so valuable and important to have that emphasis and that, again, play and all of it to happen in these early years.
Okay, brain developers, thank you for attending this webinar. As usual, I would like to invite you to take action with information you received today. As Deborah mentioned, reflect on one thing, at least one, could be 3, could be 4, could be 5. One takeaway from today's webinar, and take some notes and write down how can you implement it in your daily routine with the children and families you serve. I truly believe knowledge is power when it is implemented and shared. So please help us spread the good and be the light to others. I want to thank all the members for supporting our mission. If you would like to be an NHSA member, please visit our website. The link is in the chat. Also, I want to invite you to the Family Unite for Head Start Teachers and Staff webinar tonight. The link is in the chat at 7 p.m. Please invite your families to join us tonight. Do not miss it. Next week, we have our 3rd webinar, COVID-19 Impact on Infant and Toddlers. An up-to-date medical review of the impact COVID-19 has had on infant, toddlers, and their families with Dr. Glassie and Dr. Loria. I hope you can join us. Hopefully, you already filled out the survey. If you haven't, please make sure to click on the link and submit your survey. We really want to hear from you and how we can better support you. All right, Early Head Start family and community, this is all for today. Please be safe. Let's keep rising together. See you next Wednesday.
Bye.